March 2022, a group of young men arrived in the Ukrainian capital, coming all the way from Africa. At first glance, they looked like ordinary Ukrainians, or at least connected to Ukraine. Some spoke the language fluently. Others could pass as locals, and one even carried a Ukrainian passport. You might think they were students, businessmen, or just young travelers visiting friends and family. But in reality, these young men were mercenaries, sent to Ukraine with one mission: to assassinate President Volodymyr Zelensky. These men worked for the Russian Wagner Group, and if you've never heard of them before, that's understandable. Wagner is a secretive army, thousands of ruthless soldiers fighting purely for money. Russia uses them to commit covert operations around the world, in Syria, Sudan, Libya, Mali, Ukraine, and more. Officially, Wagner is run as a company by Yevgeny Prigozhin, a Russian businessman who had close ties to Vladimir Putin, so close, he was nicknamed Putin's chef. But over time, their story took shocking turns. Today, I'll tell you the story of Wagner, how they fought, why they exist, how they make massive profits from wars, and their presence in countries all over the world. By the end, you'll be shocked at how it all ended. In February 2014, Russian forces invaded Crimea, a Ukrainian territory, and quickly took control. But the Ukrainian people noticed something strange. Among the Russian troops were soldiers dressed in green uniforms, with no insignia, no flags, their faces covered. They became known as Little Green Men. At the time, nobody knew who they really were. Later, it was revealed they were part of a newly formed group, the Wagner Group, led by a former Russian military intelligence officer named Dmitry Utkin. Dmitry was a mysterious figure, rarely seen in public, but one famous photo shows him with tattoos of Nazi symbols on his chest, a clue to his admiration for Hitler. In fact, the name Wagner comes from the German composer Hitler admired, which Utkin chose for the group. Wagner first appeared in Ukraine in 2014 to assist Russia in taking Crimea. But honestly, they didn't play a major role there. Their real test would come in Syria. By 2015, Syria's war had reached a critical point. The Assad regime was near collapse, with opposition forces and ISIS controlling large parts of the country. Russia responded with airstrikes, but initially sent no ground troops. As soon, foreign soldiers in strange uniforms appeared again. No insignia, faces covered. These were Wagner mercenaries, sometimes called ISIS hunters. Fighting ISIS, but also Kurdish forces, they won brutal battles, taking control of key energy resources like oil fields. Here's the thing about Wagner. They're not like regular armies. Their goal isn't victory or territorial control. It's money. Every soldier knows they'll fight in the most dangerous regions in exchange for high pay, sometimes $3,000 per month, plus a share of the resources they capture. When Wagner took control of oil fields in Syria, they demanded 25% of the production, a deal turning them into a business empire, not just a brutal military force. This strategy would repeat worldwide, from Africa to the Middle East. All of this was orchestrated by one man, Yevgeny Prigozhin. Prigozhin's life was unusual. In his youth, he spent 9 years in prison for theft. Released in 1990, he founded a hot dog chain in Russia. Struggling economically after the fall of the Soviet Union, partnered with him to feed school children. Over time, Prigozhin built connections with top officials, eventually serving food at the Kremlin and earning the nickname Putin's chef. But behind the restaurants was a secret. These businesses financed Wagner's operations globally. Prigozhin managed everything: military campaigns, financial operations, even money laundering from Wagner's profits. Fast forward to February 2022. Russia launched a full-scale invasion of Ukraine. Despite their power, the Russian army struggled, suffering heavy losses in the early weeks. By March, Wagner was called in. The mercenaries shocked the world with their military skill, often outperforming the Russian army itself. Cities like Bakhmut fell quickly under their assault. Prigozhin became the recognized leader of Wagner, and Russia, which had denied any connection to the group, could no longer hide the truth. Prigozhin expanded Wagner, recruiting prisoners in Russian jails. In exchange for 6 months of service, they were promised freedom, a tempting offer for many. Wagner became a deadly, efficient, and profitable force. But the more Wagner grew, the more dangerous the situation became, not only for Ukraine, but for Russia itself. Inside Russia, tensions were building. Prigozhin felt that his fighters were doing the hardest work in Ukraine, while Russia's generals were taking all the credit. And he didn't stay quiet about it. Prigozhin began releasing voice messages and videos, openly attacking the Russian Ministry of Defense. He accused them of incompetence, corruption, and worst of all, deliberately withholding ammunition from Wagner. He claimed that hundreds of his men were dying because of poor leadership in Moscow. This was unprecedented. No one in modern Russia had ever spoken this way about the military elite, especially not someone as close to the Kremlin as Prigozhin. And then, the breaking point came. On June 23, 2023, Prigozhin released a shocking statement. He accused the Russian military of bombing a Wagner camp in Ukraine, killing his fighters. Within hours, he announced what he called a march for justice. But it didn't look like justice. It looked like a rebellion. Wagner forces stormed the city of Rostov-on-Don, a major Russian military hub. They took control in a matter of minutes. No resistance, no firefight. Videos showed Russian civilians giving food and water to Wagner fighters. Some even took selfies with them. Then Wagner's armored columns began driving north, straight toward Moscow. They traveled hundreds of kilometers inside Russia with almost no opposition. At one point, they came within 200 kilometers of Moscow, closer than any invading force in modern history. For a few hours, it looked like Prigozhin was about to start a civil war. And then, suddenly, everything stopped. Prigozhin announced that he was turning his men around to avoid the spilling of Russian blood. A deal had been made, supposedly brokered by the president of Belarus, Alexander Lukashenko. Under the agreement, Prigozhin would move to Belarus. Wagner fighters would avoid prosecution, and the rebellion would officially end. But many observers around the world felt something wasn't right. It was too quiet, too sudden, and too suspicious. But Wagner's rise in Ukraine came at a price, and Prigozhin was about to pay it. After months of public insults, criticism, and a full-armed march toward Moscow, the relationship between Wagner and the Russian state reached a breaking point. And the consequences arrived quickly. Just 2 months later, on August 23, 2023, a private jet took off from Moscow, heading to St. Petersburg. On board were several of Wagner's top commanders, including Yevgeny Prigozhin and Dmitry Utkin, the man who originally founded the group and gave it its name. Only minutes after takeoff, something went horribly wrong. Eyewitnesses reported hearing a loud explosion in the sky. Seconds later, the jet spiraled downward and crashed into a field in the Tver region. There were no survivors. International intelligence agencies later reported that the plane most likely suffered an internal explosion, not a mechanical failure, not a random accident. Meanwhile, Russian officials released short, vague statements, carefully avoiding names, suspects, or explanations. But globally, the message seemed painfully clear. The Wagner rebellion may have been forgiven publicly, but it was never forgotten. Prigozhin's death sent shockwaves across Russia and the world. The man who built Wagner from nothing, who challenged the Russian military, who embarrassed the Kremlin on live camera, was gone. Utkin, the shadowy founder and ideological backbone of the group, was gone too. And with that crash, Wagner entered a new chapter, one filled with confusion, fragmentation, and unanswered questions. Prigozhin's death didn't just remove a leader. It created a vacuum. Wagner, once a unified and terrifying force, suddenly split into different factions, each one trying to survive in its own way. The first group stayed loyal to Russia. These fighters were absorbed directly into the Russian Ministry of Defense. They kept their weapons, their training, and their missions, but lost the independence that made Wagner powerful. In other words, they became soldiers under full government control. The second group simply disappeared. Many of them were prisoners who had been promised freedom after 6 months of fighting. With Prigozhin gone, some were returned to prison. Others fled Russia entirely, unsure of who now controlled their fate. The third group, however, remained active, especially in Africa. Countries like Mali, Sudan, the Central African Republic, and Libya still depended on Wagner for protection, training, and military operations. In these regions, the group rebranded under new names, stayed in their bases, and continued doing what Wagner always did: protecting leaders, fighting rebels, and securing natural resources. Today, the organization still operates across Africa, still trains local armies, still guards mines and oil fields, but under a new structure, with far less independence and far more direct Russian influence. Some analysts say a new leader has already emerged, someone even more loyal to the Kremlin and far more brutal than Prigozhin. But his identity is still unclear, hidden behind layers of secrecy, just like Wagner in its early days. What is clear is this: Prigozhin's death ended an era. The group simply evolved from a rogue mercenary empire to a quiet extension of Russian foreign policy. And as long as wars, chaos, and valuable resources exist, groups like Wagner will always find a way to survive.